Hi, my name is Cheryl Lannon from the Berryville Area Arts Association. This video is about our 40 Shades of Green event, which celebrates Irish culture and heritage. After the literature of Greek and Latin, literature in Irish is the oldest literature in Europe, dating from the 4th or 5th century. Since English was the language of Ireland's colonizers, Irish literature is all tangled up with English literature. This dual tradition has sometimes led to Irish writers and texts being absorbed into the canon of English literature. To make things even more complicated, many of the best-known Irish authors lived and worked for long periods in exile, often in England. Many talented Irish writers have at times been claimed by the Brits, including Edmund Burke, Jonathan Swift, Oliver Goldsmith, Maria Edgeworth, Oscar Wilde, and George Bernard Shaw. But in the 1920s, after the partial independence of Ireland, Irish scholars reclaimed their work. Ireland's rich history of conquest and colonization, famine and mass immigration, resistance, rebellion, and civil war inspired the 4 Nobel laureates in literature. This is Powers Court Waterfall, said to be owned by Edmund Burke. It's by George Barrett, who was an Irish landscape artist best known for his oil paintings. He left Ireland in 1762 to establish himself as an artist in London and rapidly gained recognition as a leading artist of his time. Early in his career, Barrett produced Italianate paintings of a classic scenery, many times including a mythological creature. These were commissioned for houses in Ireland while he still lived there. There's no evidence he ever traveled to Italy. He's also painted many Irish landscapes before moving to London. Today, Barrett's amazing body of work struggles to get the prominence we think it deserves. This is Powers Court House, Wicklow, with the Sugarloaf Mountain, and he completed this one after moving to England, Beeston Castle. Hugh Douglas Hamilton's paintings from the 1756 through 1764 are the only concrete evidence of his early life in Ireland. His pastels became famous after his move to London. He blended crayon and chalk to create a more textural, softer form of pastel, fresco, and is most known for his portraits showing the head and shoulders of his subjects. This is Cupid and Psyche from 1793. James Barrie was determined to create art according to his own principles, rather than those of his patrons. He is noted for being one of the earliest Romantic painters. He also mastered the art of aquatint. We disagree with the 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica, which states, "His drawing is not especially good, his coloring ordinary, and we think this self-portrait is quite remarkable." Augustus Burke showed an early interest in drawing, displaying a love for depicting the people and land of Connemara in County Galway. He was overcome with grief when his brother Thomas was murdered and moved to England. His work is relatively rare, and as the contents of his studio were destroyed during a fire. This is Connemara Girl from 1880. Oscar Wilde was an Irish poet and playwright. After writing in different forms throughout the 1880s, he became one of London's most popular playwrights in the early 1890s. He is famous for his epigrams and plays, his novel The Picture of Dorian Gray, the circumstances of his imprisonment, and his untimely demise. The play The Importance of Being Earnest is now considered Wilde's masterpiece. Wilde produced 4 comedies in the early 1890s, which made him one of the most successful playwrights of late Victorian London. "Art is individualism," he said, "and individualism is a disturbing and disintegrating force. There lies its immense value. It seeks to disturb monotony of type, slavery of custom, tyranny of habit, and the reduction of man to the level of a machine. He spent 1895 to 1897 in jail for gross indecency. He put the time to good use, composing a long letter of his spiritual journey, which was published after his death. Released from jail, Wilde quickly left for France, never to return to Ireland or Britain, and wrote The Ballad of Ridingall, about his harsh treatment behind bars. He spent his last 3 years in exile and poverty. Wilde wandered the boulevards alone, spent what little money he had on alcohol, and died in November of 1900. George Bernard Shaw was an Irish playwright, critic, and political activist who held both Irish and British citizenship. His influence on Western theatre, culture, and politics extended from the 1880s to his death and beyond. He wrote more than 60 plays and in 1925 was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. Self-educated, Shaw was born in Dublin and moved to London at the age of 20. By the mid-1880s, he was a respected theatre and music critic. Like many aspiring writers, his first completed manuscript could not find a publisher until much later. He nearly worked himself to death in 1898 and was nursed back to health by a wealthy woman who had a romantic interest in him. But he at first declined her proposal of marriage. They eventually were married and lived together as husband and wife for the rest of her life. Annoying to just about everyone, Shaw promoted eugenics, wanted to reform the alphabet, opposed vaccination, challenged organized religion, expressed admiration for both Stalin and Mussolini, and was against both sides of the First World War. He refused all state honors, including the Order of Merit from King George VI in 1946, but his talent as a dramatist overcome any resentment over his often changing political views. William Butler Yeats was an Irish poet and a pillar of both the Irish and British literary establishments. He helped found the Abbey Theatre and won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1923. Yeats focused on identifiably Irish content and was part of the Irish literary revival movement. He said, "We hope to find in Ireland an uncorrupted and imaginative audience, trained to listen by its passion for oratory and freedom to experiment, which is not found in theatres of England." He studied poetry from childhood and was fascinated by Irish legends and the occult. His earliest volume of verse devoted to such subjects was published in 1889. His later work was influenced by a study of Hinduism. In 1889, he fell in love with Maud Gonne, a 23-year-old English heiress and Irish nationalist who loved his poetry, but not so much him. She rejected his many marriage proposals. When she married someone else in 1903, he was heartbroken, but the world got some great letters of poetry out of it. When he won the Nobel Prize in 1923, the symbolism of an Irish writer winning soon after Irish independence did not escape him. "I consider," he said, "that this honor has come to me less as an individual than as a representation of Irish literature. It is part of Europe's welcome to the Free State." For the last 5 years of his life, Yeats found a new vigor and great inspiration from his relationships with much younger women, many of whom became well-known writers in their own right. Samuel Beckett was an Irish novelist, playwright, theatre director, and poet, who wrote in English and French. He even wrote a film named Film. Beckett is known for his dark comedy, gallows humor, and bleak outlook on human existence. He won the 1969 Nobel Prize in Literature. After 2 years of psychotherapy following the death of his dad, he wrote his first novel, Dreams of Fair Two-Knitting Woman, but nobody was willing to publish it until after his death. His first successfully published book of poetry was Echoes, Bones, and Other Precipitates in 1935. He actually wrote a letter to Albert Einstein in 1936 offering to be his apprentice, but it was never delivered because of a quarantine during a smallpox outbreak. In January 1938 in Paris, Beckett was stabbed in the chest and nearly killed, but dropped the charges against his attacker. Beckett joined the French resistance after the Nazi occupation of Germany and worked as a courtier, for which he was awarded 2 medals by the French government. His most famous works is Waiting for Godot. It was written in French and later translated to English by Beckett himself. It's a play where pretty much nothing happens, but it still manages to keep the audience spellbound and glued to their seats. The play is frequently performed today. Beckett was a very private person who gave away all the money awarded to him by the Nobel Prize. And finally, we had some depictions of St. Patrick in art. It's safe to bet that a bearded St. Patrick never hung out with the staff of Jesus, dressed in all green, surrounded by shamrocks and snakes. That image is the result of 1,000 years of artistic license. It's hard to identify with certainty which images are the first of St. Patrick. The earliest painting we know with certainty depicts him is from 1370. In his earliest representations, St. Patrick is clean-shaven and often carries a triple-armed cross. In the 1600s, images of Patrick with a snake become commonplace. The claim that St. Patrick had banished all the snakes and venomous creatures from Ireland had shown up in books beginning in the 12th century. St. Patrick's Purgatory is an ancient pilgrimage site on the Station Island in Lough Derg, County Donegal, Ireland. According to the legend, the site dates from the 5th century when Jesus Christ showed St. Patrick a cave, sometimes referred to as a pit or a well, that is an entrance to purgatory. There are many artistic interpretations of this scene. After the Reformation, St. Patrick's images began to reflect contemporary clerical dress, and a new St. Patrick began to emerge, modeled along the lines of a latter-day Moses. He is shown dressed as a Tridentine bishop, his feet resting on a nest of snakes. This is also about the time Patrick gets his beard. Toward the end of the 17th century, coins and tokens are minted with his image. These often included Patrick with a beard, staff, snakes, and/or shamrocks, even though there is no historical basis for his association with the plant. By the 1800s, St. Patrick had become a truly national and international saint. He was a visual symbol of national identity, a formal movement towards the creation of an Irish school of painting began to promote Irish history. Both Catholics and Anglicans actively claimed a direct lineage back to St. Patrick and the advent of Christianity in Ireland. That's it for now. Be sure to like our YouTube video for more notice on uploaded videos.